Thank you, Madam Chair. Judge Escobar, in your testimony, you talk about the need for reforming our immigration system before we spend enormous resources trying to secure our borders from migrants who are looking for a better life. Specific to El Paso, you argue that if it were easier for Mexicans to go back and forth, that they would be less likely to want to live here permanently. However, many of the 11 million illegal immigrants came in through our international airports, whether it is El Paso International Airport or Philadelphia International Airport in my home state. I believe anywhere where there is an international airport, you are a border state. In my home city, in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, it is estimated that 10% of our population is there illegally. We are 2,000 miles away from the nearest southern border. Judge, are you aware that 40% of the people who enter the country illegally didn't sneak across a border, but entered legally and overstayed their visa?
Yes, sir, I am. And the perspective that I bring to you and that I'm trying to share with you this morning is the perspective of a southern border community that has ports of entry. You are absolutely correct in that visa overstays need to be tracked. And in fact, that is where some of the threats are coming from, which actually goes to my point that if we enact immigration reform that deals with people who want easier access along my southern border to come in and visit family or to reunify with family or to work in construction jobs that American companies give them or to work in agriculture, which are jobs given to them by American farmers. If there is a mechanism, and there is a mechanism through policy to address those individuals, then it becomes easier, I would submit, it becomes easier to track those visa overstays because we're utilizing resources to deal with a smaller population of immigrants.
You know, the question is, you had stated that 90% just come for work. They're not involved in any criminal activity. How do you separate salt from sugar? How do you separate, how do the men and women who are protecting our borders separate the 90% from the 10% who will do us harm? In 1986, Congress promised the American people that if they gave amnesty to 1.5 million illegal aliens, it turned out to be 3 million, it doubled as soon as we waved the carrot of American citizenship, that they would give amnesty. This would be a one-time deal. We would secure our borders and we would never deal with this again. Now, here we are, years later, 11 million estimated, which I believe will be more again because we are now doing this exact same thing. History has taught us nothing. What makes the promise of this Congress, the Gang of Eight in the House or the Senate or the President, what makes this promise to the American people any different than the one in 1986?
You know, I think the challenge for Congress is when it puts decisions off over the years, and you're not dealing with them on an annual basis, then you're going to end up in situations like we're in today in this nation when we're having to deal with 11 million people who, as the saying, the cliche goes, are living in the shadows. And so it should not be a one-time fix. Policy and reform should be ongoing. You can't just do it every 20 years. Immigration, the flow of people, the reasons why they come across, the reasons why businesses want certain types of workers, that's going to change year after year after year. And so I would encourage the Congress not to think of this as a one-time fix that we're never going to have to address going into the future, but instead as an ongoing long-term challenge that, as the ranking member described it, or maybe it was the chairwoman, as a journey that the Congress is going to need to address every year through its budgets and through policy reform.
Well, you know, also you talk about the need for reforming our guest worker program. As you remember, 1993 World Trade Center bomber Mahmoud Abu Halima overstayed a tourist visa and was in the country illegally. He received amnesty in 1986 by falsely claiming to be a seasonal agricultural worker, even though he was a cab driver. You argue that most migrant workers pose no threat, but one of these agricultural workers was actually an Islamist terrorist who perpetrated one of the deadliest attacks in American history. If you could prevent just one terrorist from being granted legal status, wouldn't you agree that it's worth the wait?
I think one of the things that is difficult is to define security, because security may mean something very different for you than it does for me. You may be talking about absolute security, saying that if we want to be secure, then we have to somehow, some way, maybe seal the borders or do everything possible to achieve absolute security. That is not an achievable goal. It is not possible to have absolute security.
But my question is, if you could stop one terrorist.
Well, the answer is of course.
Okay.
But I'm sorry.
You also testified that history has shown that the southern border does not present a security threat. If most of the illegal immigrants who are sneaking across our land, borders, or ports, or overstaying their visas are just looking for work, then I would argue with you that they do present a threat. They present a threat to the millions of Americans who are out of work and looking for a job. Our immigration laws are meant for two reasons: to protect the American worker and to protect our national security. How can you support policies to allow businesses to hire cheap labor at the expense of our nation's workers, American workers, when your own town of El Paso has a higher unemployment rate than the national average?
I would submit to you that if those workers were given legalized status, they would be adding to the tax base and they would be contributing to our economy in a way.
Well, there was just a study that proves that that's not true, that if we grant amnesty to the 11 million illegal aliens, the Heritage Foundation completed a study that it will cost us $2.6 trillion over the next 20 years. This is after all the tax revenue is realized. This is at a time when we're trying to balance our budget. We're trying to find more money for the men and women who protect us. But by granting amnesty, this plan of pathway to citizenship will actually cost us $2.6 trillion after taxes.
Well, I have read studies to the contrary, and so really when you talk to economists, they are a great guide for some of our most challenging policy decisions. And economists generally will agree that adding those folks into our country in a way that they can make contributions, it certainly does contribute to our economy.
Could you identify any of those economists?
You know, I'm sorry, I apologize. I did not bring the list with me. I would be happy to forward studies and names through my member of Congress who serves on this committee.
Yeah, I trust the Heritage Foundation. Thank you.